categories,
Yeah,
like places to go.
assignments, discussions.
All right, so we are now turning to some visual art and some depictions of education. So I got a page here, and it's Norman Rockwell's depictions of school. In a previous class meeting, I heard somebody say that they like Norman Rockwell. Who likes Norman Rockwell? Anybody here? Okay. What do you like about Norman Rockwell?
The fact that he's one of the great American painters, and that he kind of like really opened up a door for America in art
Okay.
that wasn't there before.
All right.
Yeah, I think the way that he depicted like the American dream, really, right?
Okay.
Like the whole idea of the American dream and like that era, in such animated
All right.
ways, and also just like the skill in his art,
Okay.
because it's so lifelike, you know, it
All right.
really just looks
So-
like
so-
pictures.
You know, photorealism
Yeah.
is something that, you know, some people, not everybody can do it, and he seems to be very good at it. Somebody else, was it, who else? Megan, did you say you like Norman Rockwell?
Yeah, I think for the most part, his paintings are optimistic.
Okay.
And they show real life situations, and they kind of like capture a point in time of American history and show kind of like a problem, but also it still maintains optimism. And I think that's also shown through the colors and just everything about his technique and artistic
Okay.
style.
So he's like photorealism, he's optimistic, he's patriotic, was there anybody ever here at anything? Does anybody have anything negative to say about Norman Rockwell? Yes?
Well, I don't know if it's not really negative, but he was paid, right, to do a lot of
Yes.
his
He
artwork,
was
right?
commissioned
So
by the
like the
US.
whole,
He was a commercial artist.
yeah.
And so one of the things is we've got these, you know, there's fine art and there's commercial art. He was an illustrator. We're gonna look at one of his things, which is an illustration of somebody else's work. So here's an author, Mark Twain, writes Tom Sawyer, he's the artist, and then this illustrator is an underling who is paid to create pictures to go along with the novel. So there's a certain sort of difference between those people who are fine artists and those people who are commercial artists and illustrators. So this is one, I think it's called The Shiner. That's one of his, which depicts a school situation. You can't see probably the detail there, but I'm gonna give each pair of people one picture, so one couple of people is gonna get this one. But up in here it says principal. So there's the principal's office, there's the principal, and here's a young woman somewhat disheveled with a black eye, and she looks pretty pleased with herself, etc.
She won.
Yeah. And so then we've got this other one. It's a rather different picture, and this is called The Caning, and this is from an illustrated version of Mark Twain's Tom Sawyer. So it's a rather different depiction of an educational setting, kind of like from Matilda, the Ms. What's her name? Trunchbull, Ms. Trunchbull. So we see a different depiction of an educational situation. And then this one is it's Happy Birthday, Miss Jones. One says Happy Birthday, Jonesy. So you've got this beloved teacher and a collection of students, and we've got an apple on the desk, and there might be another gift or two. So this is one of these more optimistic, happy depictions of education. And this is one of my favorites. It's hard to see the detail, but if you look, it's obviously autumn, so it's time to go back to school. We've got three female figures who have already passed the swimming hole, and they are on their way back to school, seeming pretty enthusiastic about it. And then you have three guys, and they're kind of looking at the diving board, and they don't have the same enthusiasm for returning to school. And what we have is an older one who seems just kind of unhappy, and then we've got a younger one who's a little more disgruntled, and then the youngest one is like totally dejected, and then over here is the dog, right? And so it's almost like you have a depiction of sort of degrees of sentience. The good girls are going back to school, and then we get these things that are basically approaching animality, right? And then this is one of his more political ones, and this is called The Problem We All Live With. So in the 60s, when there was forced integration of schools, some African American children had to be accompanied by sheriffs or National Guard in order to be allowed to go into the schools where segregation existed. So this is a slightly more powerful picture. One of the things that he's most famous for is, I think I might have put a link into it on the 4 Freedoms.
It's right above the problem we all live with.
Okay. So this is one of his most famous collections, and these freedoms actually come from, doesn't scroll, here it does, right. Comes from a speech by FDR. So FDR's speech mentioned the 4 freedoms, and then Norman Rockwell represented these ideas in paintings. So we've got freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, which now is better known as Norman Rockwell's Thanksgiving, and freedom from fear. And so at this level, you'd say, okay, yes, he's an artist, but this is propaganda, okay? And what do we think when we hear the word propaganda? Propaganda bad. Well,
Mind control.
what's that?
It's controlling our mind.
Mind control.
Oh, look.
I listened to an episode of This American Life.
Okay.
And it was about propaganda.
Yeah.
One of the examples of propaganda that they talked about was the guerrilla warfare going on. I think it was in Colombia, and how this man, this company who just did like advertisements, you know, for whatever on TV, they were hired by the government to like spearhead this project to get all of these people who were going into the jungles of Colombia and, you know, training in this warfare to come back. And it was propaganda, but it was really touching. Like some of the things that they did were really touching. Yeah. So yeah, it's hard to not picture propaganda as negative, because like the first time I learned about propaganda was when you learn about the I don't know, World War II, and it's like crazy, you know, whatever, like crazy stuff, and you look at it and like, that would never happen today, but it's all around us, just more deceiving now.
And one of the things is, the word propaganda itself, it's a Latin root, and it's like a future passive participle. All those things that end in unda, like propaganda, memoranda, corrigenda, it's to be done. It's what is about to be done. So it's just a future passive participle. But what happens is, it takes on the force of ought to be done. So an agenda is the things that ought to be done. The memoranda is the thing that ought to be remembered, okay? So propaganda, there's, you know, communist propaganda, well, that's bad because we don't like communists. There's, you know, Nazi propaganda, that's bad because we don't like Nazis. But during the World War II, there was a whole lot of pro-American propaganda that was to get people to buy war bonds, or to basically not be upset that there was this mandatory 48-hour work week, or basically say, you know, loose lips sink ship. If you know something about a service person, you don't share that information because it's dangerous. So in effect, Norman Rockwell was engaged in the production of propaganda, but it's propaganda that many people would say, and you know, this was an important, valuable message at that time. And because he was popular, because most of his things would appear on the cover of the Saturday Evening Post, or they were on the cover of Boy's Life, which is the Boy Scout magazine. It was propaganda for a particular audience, and it was particularly impactful in part because he was sort of a rather masterful artist. So, now...
Can I just elaborate on that a little bit, not on this particular image, but on the notion of propaganda, and suggest that leading political scientists are now arguing that we are in the midst of more propaganda than we ever have been before, because journalism has changed. They said there's been a switch from objective investigative journalism to what they call industrial journalism.
This is for you too.
Objective investigative journalism means that journalists are hired to go out and investigate and report, and they seek out corruption, and their purpose is to tell the public about corruption, wherever it may lead. But industrial journalism happened over the last few decades because news outlets realized that it was expensive to be sending all these journalists around, and it would be much cheaper to fire them and replace them with talking heads who argue with each other. So now you have news outlets all over the place of all ideological stripes, where people think they're getting news, but all they're getting is two rather ignorant people arguing with each other about what's happening in the world. That's industrial because it's profit-centered, as opposed to serving the purpose of telling us what's going on in the world. So that was just a bit of a side trip.
All right, thanks. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start up the internet stopwatch, which I can probably find. There's it called the online stopwatch. Online stopwatch countdown. And I think I'm gonna give you 5 minutes initially, and maybe you'll want some more time. And so what you're gonna do is you're looking at this figure that you have. And Dr. Ambrose mentioned earlier mode switching. So this figure it's visible art, and you see it all at once. And what you're gonna now do is switch into that mode and say, what is the argument, or what is the story that this picture tells? With the possibility that it might be open to more than one interpretation. And again, sort of this notion of the better the art, the more open it might be to multiple interpretations. If there's only one possible interpretation, then it's like, it's simple. And if there are possible conflicting interpretations, like, oh, this is a little bit richer. So I'm gonna start the clock and give you 5 minutes, after which you'll report out what your image says. What is the story of your image? All right, you're on the clock. You got 5 minutes.
So, I have a picture of Canada. Well, she got the fight, and then she got Tom Cruise.